Alright lads, so today we're going to talk about Stockholm Syndrome. What it can be used for, what it can't be used for, some things that work well with it, some things that might be a bit But overall we're just going to outline benefits and uses, so stick around and find out. Let's start with the basic form of the skill, keeping the civilians down and keeping them intimidated for 50% longer. Now this can be useful, believe it or not, in stealth and loud. Especially in stealth because of things like map controls. You'll want to keep all the civilians down and not bother about running around like a headless chicken. For example, in this clip, we're in Go-Bank, but instead of running around shouting at everyone, which can be very tedious, we'll just keep them all on the floor, and we won't need to worry about the whole map at all. Which makes our life a hell of a lot easier when doing things like answering the phone. In loud, this can also be used to help your teammates get as many hostages as possible. Just use your loud gun and all the civilians will be controlled, and you won't have to worry about them all escaping. This maximizes capturing potential for your team, which means you'll have a lot more hostages for lives.
Sometimes taking a hostage is the only answer.
Now let's talk about what happens to all those lovely hostages you've just tied up. With the ace version of the skill, once cops have gone to try and rescue them, they will not flee. As we can see in this clip, the hostages that the camera is looking at have been tied up with Stockholm Syndrome. The ones escaping have not. Basically what this all means is that you can put hostages into a nice safe area, and even if cops go to rescue them, they will not move from that area, so you won't have to worry about finding them again. It also means you know where your hostages are at all times. The only downside to this is that your hostages will be allowed to escape again if somebody decides to tie them up without the skill. So maybe just let them know that you've got your hostages and not to tie them up until it's absolutely necessary. Because if they come and tie them up, then it's all wasted. If it's not during a trading phase, they'll be allowed to just run out if they get rescued. Here is where things get a little bit complicated. We're going to talk about the instant custody trade. Now this only works one time during a heist, but it is well worth it. It's even more powerful than taking Messiah, because even Messiah won't save you from something like a cloaker kick. Plus, you only have a certain amount of time to use Messiah before you're unable to get yourself up. And not to mention the insane skill investment, whereas Stockholm Syndrome is a tier 3 skill, Messiah is a tier 4 skill. Now let's have an in-depth look of how payday trading actually works. One thing to note is that if you're using jokers, civilian trading will always take priority over them. This means that as long as there's one civilian on the map, it will always be traded first, and your jokers will not give themselves up. So because of Stockholm Syndrome, I won't have to sacrifice my joker, which is fantastic because it can be a real pain to get another one, especially if playing on the highest difficulty. Another thing to note is that if there's no civilians on the map, you can't use someone's joker to get back. That means even during assault breaks when the joker gives themselves up. Which is kinda weird that you're able to be traded, but you can't use the Stockholm trade. It's a little bit iffy, but maybe it's an oversight, I'm not sure. Perhaps just some gag by the developers. But either way, I'm glad Stockholm Syndrome users can keep civilians on the map, so I'm not having to risk myself getting another joker. I also don't like joker trading in general, just because they can give up in a really awkward spot, whereas you can move civilians to a really safe area, unlike converts which can't be moved even in just their dominated cop state.
Yeah, it's ended, but we're waiting on Lock to say. There we go.
Where is it? Oh, here. Nice.
Give me max ammo. So
We
I
might
can
have
kill
enough
the thing.
time. Oh no, we don't have enough time to get one of the bots out. Never mind, they can stay in custody. So, in conclusion, Stockholm Syndrome is a great way to keep civilians on the map. And as we know, more civilians is more lives. It's also a cheap, guaranteed way to get yourself out of custody, being a tier 3 skill and not a tier 4 skill. In the Revenant tree we have Feign Death, but it's only a chance to get yourself back up, and Messiah, which requires the use of a medbag, and has a very limited time to use it in. It can't be used with converts, so make sure that hostage number in the top right is always above 0. As long as you've got at least a 1 in that HUD, then you're fine. I'm honestly really surprised that Stockholm Syndrome wasn't a tier 4 skill, just with all the stuff it can do. Something that wasn't mentioned is that no matter how many civilians you kill, Stockholm Syndrome will let you skip that trade delay. So you can just go about and launch that rocket right into the pile of civilians. Bane won't care, so long as you've got Stockholm Syndrome. Doesn't matter how many hours you've got in custody, just get yourself right back into the fight. I also really like how Stockholm Syndrome is a team-based skill, rather than just focusing on getting yourself out of trouble, just because of the ability to keep all the civilians on the map, which will benefit your team in the long run if somebody goes into custody. So I hope I've shed a bit of light on Stockholm Syndrome. I may have missed a couple of things, because honestly, Stockholm Syndrome is so complicated, even though it doesn't look like it, but there's so many different factors that can change how things work. So I'm hoping that I've made things a bit more clear, and maybe shown off the potential. I'll see you in the next video, YouTube.